You know those niche video games you'd play as a kid and you remember nowadays as, hey, remember Finding Nemo, the video game for the PlayStation 2? Yeah, I know we have at least one game we look back on like this. Whether these games age like fine wine, or it was just our childish brains going, hey, look, I'm playing as Sid the Sloth. Oh my god. These games still hold a special place in our hearts for one reason or another. Today, I want to take a look into some of these games that I look back on and see if they were actually enjoyable games or I'm just blinded by nostalgia. Also, seeing what happened to these games and where they even came from the first place. Now, some of these games that I have listed here may or may not be considered niche, and if I am wrong about any of these games, please just let me know in the comments because I'm simply basing on how much I heard anyone talk about these games, how many views the initial trailer for them got, or how many reviews the game had received on various websites. Who knows? Maybe one of these games randomly had thousands and thousands of active players at some point, and me calling them niche is very undeserving. But at the end of the day, this is my video. So without further stalling, let's hop into some nostalgic games. So, this is editing Chris here, and I said this was my list and stuff, and I jokingly made that statement at the beginning of the video saying, oh, maybe one of these games had like millions or like thousands of active players. So, after doing some digging, I found that Happy Wars actually has 10 million downloads on the Xbox 360. Um, I don't care. This is still my video. I'm not changing anything I said. Just know that this game had 10 million downloads and I failed to mention that, so I'm mentioning it here. So let's get on with the video. Happy Wars was a game that was developed by a company called Toy Logic. Now, that name may or may not sound familiar to you because they helped in developing some more well-known titles, such as Kid Icarus Uprising, the Nier Replicant remake, and wait a minute, even Super Smash Bros. Brawl? I mean, even if Brawl is seen as one of the worst Smash Bros. Titles, it was still a great game and one I have many great memories of, and I'm positive most of you watching do as well. So it came to a huge surprise to me when doing research for this video when I found out Toy Logic helped to develop Smash Bros. The games they helped to develop seem to do very well, as most of the titles I just mentioned aren't classics in the community. So why wouldn't Toy Logic take their stab at developing and publishing their own video game? From as far as I could find, there's unfortunately no information available saying exactly when this game began its development. The earliest signs of this game I could find was the official trailer for the game, posted on Toy Logic's official YouTube page, which was posted on June 5th, 2012, featuring 3 minutes of what to expect from the game. 4 months after this trailer was posted, Happy Wars would finally be released to the Xbox 360 on the Xbox Live Arcade. Now, unfortunately, during that time, you kinda had to have the Xbox Gold membership to even play this game. So it wasn't entirely free, which I feel hurt the game more than it helped it, as it wasn't easily accessible considering how the game both looked and played. It definitely wasn't something you would buy yourself, because you kinda had to buy the membership, so the game wasn't technically free, you know? But luckily a couple years later, in January of 2012, they would decide to update the game to allow Xbox Silver members to access the game, leading the game to be truly free to play and more accessible. Now, funny enough, this was around the time I played Happy Wars for the first time. Little third grade Chris was fucking hyped to play this game. Now, this game definitely looks and feels like it should have been 100% free to play from the start, but hey, it's better late than never, right? A couple months after this update to the game's availability, they would take it a step further and announce the beta for the PC version of the game in April, and soon after, on May 28th, the Steam version of this game would be released, allowing PC players to have a chance to play this game for free. Now, as you can see, this game released near the end of the life of the Xbox 360, and with the release of the Xbox One in November of 2013, they would decide to make a version of this game for the newer console. So, on June 9th, 2014, Toy Logic would announce the release of the Xbox One version of Happy Wars. That would of course also be free to play, and would be released sometime in the spring of 2015. The Xbox One version was made open to the public on April 24th, 2015, and sadly, this is kind of where the journey ends for Happy Wars, because 3 years after the release of the Xbox One edition, the servers to both the Xbox 360 and Steam versions of this game would be shut down. The Xbox 360 servers being shut down makes a lot of sense to me, since it is an older console, but I have no idea why they would shut down the Steam servers, as a good majority of gamers do play games using Steam, so I don't know why they would decide to do this. And it's not like they shut down the servers for Happy Wars as a whole, because the Xbox One servers are still up to this day, so it's even more surprising to hear that they shut down the servers for Steam. So finally, after talking about the history of this game, we could finally delve into the gameplay aspect. The gameplay structure is very simple and basic to follow. There are 2 castles in which players spawn, one for your team and one for the enemy team. There was, for the most part, one main path which led to both castles, and along this path were vacant spots for where towers could be built. The main objective was to take over all these tower spots and ultimately take over the main castle of your enemy. Whoever could take over the enemy team's castle first won. Simple as that. Despite the main objective of this game being fairly simple to understand, the game would actually get pretty intense at times and be fairly close match. But to be fair, this game is very heavily team dependent, so having bad teammates would most times cause you to lose the game, and considering this game is tended more towards children, that would happen more times than not. Another element of the gameplay were the different classes you could choose from. At the start of every match, you would be met with a screen asking you to choose one of 3 classes, either the warrior, mage, or cleric. With the warrior focusing on frontlining and having more health and doing more damage at a close range, the mage having lower health but mainly focusing on longer range attacks, and cleric's main gimmicks being they could both heal and revive fallen allies during battle. One of the features I enjoyed about these classes though was the fact they all had their own unique subclasses, which changed how you played that class entirely, or not so much. The cleric subclass was the engineer, which would focus on building sentries to help fortify both the castle and other areas of the map. The mage had the Zephyr, the
Zephyr. Zephyr. Zephyr.
the Zephyr. Anyways, despite having a stupidly hard name to pronounce, the Zephyr basically would control other people despite their inputs and do like actions against their wills. And finally, the warrior had the Berserker, which, to be honest, isn't much different from the base class, since you trade out your shield for a second sword, which did lead you to do more damage, but honestly that's sort of the whole point of the warrior anyway. Like, I know his whole thing is to have high defense while also doing a good amount of close range damage, but sacrificing your defense to do more close range damage seems like more or less the same concept to me. Each of these classes also had their own set of special skills or abilities they could use, but the only way to obtain these skills was via leveling up throughout the match, sort of like, oh god, League of Legends. Look, I'm sorry for that jump scare, but yeah, this system made it so you actually had to, play the match and do somewhat well to get the more overpowered and fun abilities towards the end of the match. Now, sadly, I can't play this game anymore. As I mentioned earlier, the servers for Steam shut down about 5 years ago now. Ah, Jesus, dude. 2018 was 5 years ago? That doesn't even sound right to say. So, I don't know or remember the class-specific abilities they had. I do know Warrior had this ability where he would just dash forward, pushing enemies back, and I know that was featured in the trailer that was playing. And of course, the Cleric had the ability to revive people. Overall, the game honestly was a blast to play when I was younger, and it was something I always looked forward to playing after school. Now, the big question is, do I think this game is actually fun, or is it just the memories and nostalgia I have of it that's blinding me? Well, since I am unable to actually play the game to tell for myself, just looking at the gameplay trailers and footage again, I could say I genuinely would give this game a second go and play it again. Now, I won't say whether or not it's still good or not, since that would be totally unfair, as I quite literally cannot play the game to test it out 10 years later. But I can say I would 100% try to play this game again if I could, and I probably would say it still holds up today, just judging by what I've seen and what I remember of it. And with that, we're done talking about Happy Wars, so let's move on to the next game. Being released on January 30th of 2013 for Windows, the Xbox Live Arcade, and the fucking Windows Phone? I didn't even know this was a thing until looking into this game, let alone Skulls of the Shogun being able to be played on it. What you're seeing right now is actually footage from the Windows Phone. It's rather surprising I never heard of this considering it's been around since 2009 and was discontinued in 2017, so it's been around for more or less 8 years. Also, while trying to find the footage being shown, I came across a hilarious finding that not one, not two, but 5 different people recorded early gameplay of the phone version using another phone, and I just had to share this as it came across as extremely silly to me. But enough about the Windows Phone, I'm here to talk about the history of Skulls of the Shogun. The company who developed Skulls of the Shogun was 17-bit, but was formerly known as Haunted Temple Studios. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you never heard of them, as they didn't develop many well-known titles. They've only developed games such as Skulls of the Shogun, Song in the Smoke, and Galaxy. Of the 3 I just mentioned, one of the more popular ones is Song in the Smoke, as it's a survival VR game. The company would decide to change their name to 17-bit after testing the name on the PAX East show floor. But coincidentally enough, Skulls of Shogun would actually be playable for the first time at this event, which took place in 2011. Now, unlike Happy Wars, this game was actually playable on quite a bit of platforms, so I won't be going into too much depth on all of them like I did with Happy Wars, but I will mention them by name while only focusing on the bigger, more played on platforms. The game was originally supposed to be released on the Xbox Live Arcade similar to Happy Wars in 2012, but missed that vision by a little over a month. Surprisingly enough, I was actually able to find some information about the development of this game. In an interview with the lead designer of the game, Jake Kasdal, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, he discusses that the game had been in development for 3.5 years prior. Note, this interview took place on November 26, 2012, so it's safe to assume that this game began its development sometime around June of 2009. Jake states that the main factor driving him and his team to develop Skulls of the Shogun was a deep, intense love of the faster, more arcade-style maps in games like Advance Wars and Shining Force. Jake and the people at 17-bit really wanted to make Skulls of the Shogun a faster turn-based game, and a lot less linear like most other turn-based games. The one thing they steered away from in this game was menus, grids, and a rock, paper, scissors like combat system. I'm actually really happy I was able to find a lot more information on this game compared to Happy Wars, as it showed me a side of this game I wouldn't have seen otherwise. Now, back to the timeline of this game's release history. Only 5 months later, in June of 2013, 17-bit would release Skulls of the Shogun Bonafide Edition for Steam. However, unlike the Xbox Arcade version, this game would come at a cost of $10 USD. Whether or not this game is worth $10 will be decided by me at the end. It's insane to me that only after 5 months would they release, essentially, an upgraded version of this game, as the Bonafide Edition featured a new character called the Tanuki Monk, 4 new levels of the campaign mode, new multiplayer maps, and they even added a progression system to the game. I feel bad for anyone who's playing on any other version than Bonafide at this time, since they weren't able to access this new content. A couple years would go by with some various versions releasing, such as the OS X, Linux, and Ouya version? Yeah, I'm just as confused as you are as to what the hell an Ouya is. It was a fairly unpopular console, considering I've never heard of it, and it only lasted 2 years from 2013 and then being discontinued in 2015. Yeah, I know I said I wouldn't focus on the random versions of this game, but come on, I couldn't just mention the Ouya without talking about it. But after this time of random systems obtaining this game, finally, the version that matters the most to me was released on June 1st of 2015, the PS4 edition. Shortly after its release to the PlayStation Store, it actually would be featured on that month's PS Plus free games lineup alongside Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes on June 3rd. This is where the game came into my life for the first time. You see, for some Chris lore, I had gotten my PS4 sometime during June of that year, and the only game I had at the time was Mortal Kombat X, as that was the whole reason I bought my PS4. Yes, I was so hyped for the new Mortal Kombat game, I bought a PS4 just to play it. But I obviously wanted more games to play, so when I saw that game in the free collection, I decided to pick it up. And yes, I chose that over Metal Gear, even though I could have gotten both. I really don't know what 4th grade Chris was thinking. But I'm glad I decided to get this game, as it was so fun and I had a blast playing both the campaign and the multiplayer with my friends. Alright, now that the lore dump is over, there is one final version of this game I need to mention, and it's shockingly enough the Nintendo Switch version that released recently on July 11, 2019. It's crazy to me how even 6 years later, this game is still being ported onto other consoles, considering the game wasn't overly popular or anything. Now, after learning about the history of this game, let's take a look at how it plays. As mentioned earlier, this game is a turn-based game with each player controlling a certain amount of troops. Now, this game does actually have quite a bit of mechanics, so I'll try my best to give you guys a brief rundown of each mechanic. Depending on the size of the map, you'd get a varying amount of cavalry, archers, and warriors to control. But regardless of map size, all players would start with a sleeping general who would stay asleep and power up over time until you decide to wake him up. Each player would be given 5 turns to move around the troops they wished and move them to where they saw best. Each unit had their own unique movement circle, with cavalry having the largest, archer the second, and warriors being the shortest. On top of this, each unit also had their own stats consisting of an attack and defense stat. An interesting and unique mechanic this game has is the skull eating. Whenever you defeat an enemy troop or your own troop dies, you can eat the skull they drop to increase your stats, with the max being 3 skulls. After eating the 3rd skull, your troop would be the strongest it could be, so any additional skulls eaten would just heal that troop for a certain amount. Now, you may be thinking, what's even the point of this game? Well, whoever could kill the other generals first would win the match. Depending on your opponent and how many troops they have, it's easier said than done sometimes. Another factor of the gameplay I want to talk about is the haunting mechanic. By sacrificing a troop's opportunity to move, attack, and be vulnerable to enemy attacks for 1 turn, you can haunt various shrines to summon a specific unit or any of the 3 mentioned before. However, to summon the 3 common units, they require rice, which is the in-game currency obtained by haunting rice fields. The 4 special units had to be summoned at their respective shrines and were only on certain maps. The issue with this is even if you had a maxed out monk, anyone at any time could haunt that shrine and essentially delete that unit. This means you have to play more around that shrine once you've successfully haunted it, which could cause you to be more defensive and not as aggressive, dragging out the games longer. The 4 special units in this game were the Crow, Salamander, Fox, and the newly added Tanuki in the Bonafide edition. Now, they all had their own unique abilities, and honestly, this segment is already long enough as is, so all I'll say about them is Fox is the best because he could heal and revive units, so yeah. If you want to know more about the other units, just play the game yourself. It's truly really fun. Now, this game definitely was created with tons of passion and care from the team, and it shows, not only in the art style and OST, but especially in the gameplay as well. You could tell the developers really wanted to make a unique game. This is such a creative take on this style of game, and really makes you think of what move you want to take and how you should take it most of the time. I personally haven't seen a game similar to Skulls of the Shogun since its release, and I believe it's severely underrated. And now, it's time for the big question. Do I consider Skulls of the Shogun to still be a fun game in 2023? And I could say very confidently, yes. You know, I still find this game really fun when I'm hanging out with my friends and randomly I'll just ask, hey, do you guys want to play Skulls of the Shogun? And most of the time they'll say, yeah, let's play, and we'll hop on the game. That just goes to show that even a game that's 10 years old can still be a lot of fun with friends. I will say maybe $10 isn't too worth it, but I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't consider rebuying this game for Steam for $10. And finally, we could talk about the final video game of this video. Come on now, would this video even be complete if I didn't talk about Charlie Murder? This was one of the first games I played on this channel. I mean, more accurately, this guy recorded it using his dad's phone and uploaded it as a gameplay video.
Fellow gamers, and today we're going to be doing Charlie Murder, way to good ending.
I have no idea why I originally didn't include this game on the list, but after writing the scripts for both of the last games, it just did not feel right with me to not talk about this legend of a game. Now, before I get into the timeline and history of this game, I do have to mention that compared to the other games, Charlie Murder doesn't actually have much of a history to talk about or as big of a release timeline, so keep that in mind. Alright, so now we can talk about the history of this game. In January 2010, it would be announced by the developer Scott Studios in a blog post that the game would be released as an Xbox Live Indie Games title sometime in March of that year. A couple months after this announcement, the game would be playable as a demo at PAX East 2010. So only a year later, Skulls of the Shogun was also playable at this same event. Crazy how it lines up like that. Anyways, the demo seemed to do really well, as many people would test this game out and say the game was very unique in both its art style and gameplay format. A lot of people would also compliment this game's punk rock soundtrack. And fun fact, James Silva, the owner of Scott Studios, did most of the sound work for this game, so great job, James. Despite the well reception the demo received at the event, James would announce in May that the game would undergo a complete overhaul and would instead be released for the Xbox Live Arcade in 2012, similar to every game in this video. Yeah, common theme between games being fairly niche and being initially released for the Xbox Live Arcade. Despite the original plan of being released sometime in 2012, the game would actually make its big debut to the arcade on August 14th, 2013, nearly a year later than first imagined by Scott Studios. A quick fact I wanted to mention, and I didn't know where else to mention it, so here you go, is the fact Scott Studios mainly consisted of solely James, until him and Michelle Jouet, a tester of one of James's earlier games, met for the first time at Penny Arcade Expo in 2009. Hey guys, editing Chris here. You see, at the time I didn't realize Penny Arcade Expo was just that's just PAX. So yeah, disregard me saying, "Oh, Penny Arcade Expo." A year later in 2010, coincidentally around the time this game would come out as a demo at PAX, they would begin dating and Michelle would leave ArenaNet to join Scott Studios. After she joined, the two would work on the game with James doing all the coding and Michelle doing the marketing for the game. Michelle would also help James both design the art and compose the music. Also, something really sweet that I found was that James had actually proposed to Michelle at PAX 2011 using an in-game cutscene. I just had to bring this up, since they were the only two to work on this game, so to use a special in-game cutscene like that just seems very fitting and extremely touching to me. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the final piece of release timeline. I told you, it was not very big. The second and final versions of this game to release would drop on May 17th, 2017, being the Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Now, I consider myself a pretty big fan of this game, as I own both the Xbox 360 and Steam versions of this game. I know, I'm pretty awesome. With this being the end of the timeline, I'm pretty sure you guys know what's next. This game, as described by James himself, is a brawler RPG, or as he calls it,
Brawl PG, and hope that people just run with it.
Also, in that interview, he mentions how it was inspired by other beat-em-up games, such as Ninja Turtles and Punisher Arcade. The game definitely feels like a unique beat-em-up and isn't just spam button over and over and win. The game follows Charlie and his punk rock band consisting of Lester, Kelly, Rex, and Tommy, all of which the player could choose from. The game does have similar attributes of Diablo, where each character has their own unique level, so if you beat the game with one character and max them out, all of the other 4 characters would stay at level 1, which is definitely an aspect of the game I really enjoy, since I could very easily play the game solo with one character, while not losing my progress on another if I was playing as them with my friends. All of the characters played a different instrument and would use them to activate their special attacks. It was always neat to me to see what characters used what instrument and how that would be incorporated into their style of play. For example, Kelly is a backup singer, so most of her special attacks focus on supporting all the other band members rather than directly dealing damage to bosses or enemies. For any of you who are OG fans, you would know I always played as Tommy, since I always found his buzzsaw attacks not only cool, but extremely good at dealing with huge clusters of enemies. Since I've been talking about the special attacks, allow me to go into more detail into them. Special attacks were moves that could be used on command, but after that would be on cooldown for a certain amount of time. The way you would obtain these special attacks is via the various tattoo parlors throughout the game. The thing with this though, is every tattoo parlor contained a certain special, so you couldn't just get the most busted one at the very first parlor. You'd have to wait for the ones near the end of the game, which is awesome, since it prevents the player from just steamrolling through the game. Besides these, there were of course your default basic attacks and heavy attacks. The basic attacks could be comboed into heavy attacks, or you could throw your enemy into the air to continue the combo. These attacks weren't entirely outclassed, since they could be buffed using items. Pretty nice segue if I say so myself. Items are obtained either from random enemy drops or can be purchased from various shops. The categories of items were fist, head, body, and accessories. Obviously, the head and body slots would be used to increase one's health and damage taken. The fist not only increased your damage, but could further increase it if the fist had an element attached to it. Fist could come with many different elements like lightning, poison, or fire. These modifiers pretty much just made your attacks do damage over time, which not only looked cool, but also packed a punch. Another form of damage you can do were the team up attacks. This was a skill you had to use your points on to obtain, and once you unlocked it, the attack would charge up over time. If you were playing with friends, you would need another person to also press the button to activate it, or if you were playing solo, you could just use it whenever. These attacks were very powerful and were your main source of damage when going against the bosses. Every character had a special team-up attack, with Tommy's being a huge robot that shot rockets.
Go, 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 go! Glitchy robot! Yeah! You wondering why we call it glitchy robot? Look at the legs! Look at the freaking legs!
The way Charlie Murder approaches leveling up is also pretty cool. Instead of your generic XP system, the game actually had you gain followers throughout your playthrough, and once you hit a certain milestone of followers, you would gain skill points to buff your character's stats. I do think this approach to levels is cool because it means if you do better than your friends, you'll gain an advantage over them. It also heavily demotivates just farming for XP before a big boss, since the big boss is kind of where you got most of your followers from. The last thing I will talk about is the presence of the true ending. Now, this game actually had quite a bit of replayability with the true ending, hidden areas to discover, hidden characters to unlock, but for sure the most fascinating of them all is the true ending. To get the true ending, you had to acquire different body parts of the creature known as Smokula. Once you collected all the parts, the boss would show himself alongside the final boss of the game. Then, once you defeated him, you'd be met with a portal to enter where the true final boss would be shown, the Angel of Chaos. After defeating him, the credits would roll and this was the true ending. It's so amazing to me to see a game so in-depth and as fun as this be made by a team of 2 people. I mean, most games that have a full team aren't even as close to how good this game is. James and Michelle truly put a lot of passion into this game, and I really mean that. With that, I could finally answer this question for the final time. Do I really think Charlie Murder is an enjoyable game today? I think the answer is quite obvious, but 100% yes I do. Besides the fact that it's what started my channel, I still play this game today and plan on 100%ing it once I get the chance to. This game holds a special place in my heart for a reason, and it goes just beyond the memories I have of it. This game really is a hidden gem, and I recommend you guys go play it. Now, after all is said and done, we can finally wrap up this video. Wow, this video ended up being a lot longer than I imagined. I thought this video would maybe be 15 minutes long, but nope, it turned out to be over 12 minutes longer than that, and that's not a bad thing at all. I am really passionate about these 3 games as they were some of my core games of my childhood, and it was a blast to look back on them and talk about their histories. It's just wild that the original plan for this video was to talk about 6 different games. I could barely talk about 3. That's why after I wrote, recorded, and edited the Happy Wars part, I realized I would only be able to talk about a couple of these games, so I chose the other 2 that held a very special place in my heart. I know it seems like I was just agreeing and saying all these games are still good today, but trust me, my original video idea included games that aren't so good now. I just had to make a decision on what games to pick, so I chose the ones I look more fondly over, and we ended up with this. But this does go to show that it's more than possible to make a game that stands the test of time, but just was never given the attention it deserved. I really do recommend you guys go try out Skulls of the Shogun and Charlie Murder if you're able to. I'm more than positive you guys won't regret it. Also, I am trying a new format of videos, so let me know what you guys thought of my first attempt at a video essay style of video. It would mean a lot to me. So with all of this, we finally end the video, and I just want to say thank you so much if you made it this far. I know my uploads haven't been, well, the greatest, but we'll see how this video does and maybe I'll make a comeback. I've mainly been streaming over at twitch.tv/SonicIO5, so go watch me over there too if you enjoyed the content. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video. Yes, I know, mandatory YouTuber stuff, blah blah blah, but that's pretty much everything I wanted to say, and I'm not good at ending stuff, so bye bye.